Hey, 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 this is Ash Nicole, also known as Saxitlerg. I don't know if anybody actually knows how to say that. Anyway, I'm just doing a little narration for this process video. Never done that before, so hopefully it'll help some people understand my process a little bit more. I'm doing a watercolor for Baby Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy, Volume 2. Oh, that movie was so good. Loved Baby Groot. He made me well up a couple times. Anyway, so mixing up the colors now. Mixing up the colors always takes so long. Yeah. Yeah. Mixing up brown is one of the most fun and yet most challenging of all the watercolor colors, just because there's so many different kinds of brown. You always want to get the right one, but burnt sienna is just always the best. And yeah, sorry. Starting off with the pot. I forget words. I'm very tired. I'm sorry. Um, Kind of a terracotta color. I love that color. So good. Putting in a dab of yellow. More than a dab, actually. But mixing in, dropping in foreign color like that will really add a lot of life to your watercolors. Keep everything from looking too solid. Because that's the great thing about watercolors, is just how receptive they are to being mixed. It's the best. And I know so many artists who hate watercolors. They're like, oh no, they're so hard. It's like, I guess they're hard, but I never thought of them as hard. I just thought of them as fun. Okay, now mixing up color for Groot himself. A lot of browns. I always like the reddish browns a little bit better. So, I took a watercolor class with this man that I'm very upset I don't remember his name, because he's a somewhat famous watercolorist in San Antonio. That's where I grew up. I grew up near San Antonio. And he gave me just the best recipe for mixing browns and blacks, which is burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. You mix those two together, and it'll give you a black or a dark brown that's just fantastic, and it's so much more alive than if you had just used the black that comes in the watercolor tube, because this will be a black that has hints of blue and it has hints of brown, and it's just great. But why am I talking about that when I used burnt sienna for this? And dropped in a little bit of yellow a minute ago, as you could see. Just as soon as I saw Groot, I knew I wanted to paint him. He's so alive. I keep kind of meaning to read the Groot comics, but you know, who's got the money to keep up with comics? I say, as a comic book artist. But yeah. So yeah, there's with watercolors, like, you always got to do the base, everything first. With watercolors, you really have to think of it looking from the bottom up. And here I'm about to do a little bit of texture going in with splattering. There it is. Taking my brush and splattering on some. I'm doing wet and wet splattering so that the fresh droplets will kind of smear into the old ones. And as you can see, it kind of spreading out there. Nice. Spread a little bit more with a wet brush. And the towel was, of course, just to protect the painting, because who's got time for all that fancy matting? Am I right? Come on, it's so much easier just to risk totally ruining your painting. Be smart, kids. Mat your painting. Put on masking tape or matting fluid. Don't just use a towel. Okay. So, some purple, ultramarine, a little cadmium red. I am sorry if I'm a little slow on this video. I painted this back in May, back when the movie came out, and then I lost the painting for a while, and I couldn't find it. Hang on. I guess that tells you what sort of life I lead. Not terribly organized, that I could lose a painting for months like that. But yeah, so I had this recording, and I couldn't do anything with it because I couldn't find the painting, so I couldn't make a proper photograph of it. But anyway, so here it is, October. I found it again, and so I'm just a little slow because I don't quite remember in what order I did everything, because I always just sort of skip around when it comes to paintings, because you kind of have to. You can't like just paint from the top down or whatever, because you don't want to you don't want to paint with wet colors right next to another wet color, because it'll smear and it'll bleed into each other in ways that you don't want. So mixing up the colors for the leaves here, it always takes me a couple tries to do some good greens, because I'm always like, oh, I'm gonna mix up my own proper green, and then I fail, and then I just use one of the pre-done greens. So watch, I'll give up here in a second. Oh no, maybe not. Maybe I saved it. Look at me. Funny story about these paints that you're seeing right here. These paints I no longer have, because when I opened up my painting kit a few weeks ago, they were all covered in mold, something that I did not know could even happen, but it can. So I had to just rinse them all out with boiling water and put in new paints. Okay, so putting in a little green. I love his little shoots. It's the best. Dipping in a little bit of yellow to make that green come alive. Sorry, it's so small. And then dip in a little green all around his trunk area to look like moss growing. That's just the best. I love looking at trees where you can see all the moss and everything growing on it. Or is it lichen? I don't know. Who knows that kind of stuff? I don't. So yeah, sorry you didn't get to see the sketching process for this, but I actually didn't sketch it on the watercolor paper. I had it sketched in my sketchbook as part of my commission sheet, and then I thought, hey, this is nice. I should make a watercolor out of this. So I just traced it over it with my light box onto some watercolor paper, because you always want thicker paper when you do watercolors. I did not follow that rule when I was younger, and I always ended up with watercolors that were just all crinkled and nasty, because first of all, I didn't know to tape them down, and second, it never occurred to me that paper wrinkles when it gets wet. Okay, wettening up the background here so that I can throw in some color to hide all that brown that happened whenever I speckle it in. So anytime I do this, I always just sort of wet the whole back of the paper, and then I just start dropping in color. I do this a lot with my watercolors where they don't have a defined background. I'll wet the whole thing and just start dropping in colors. And always keep a paper towel handy, because you never know when you want to drop in colors, and you never know when you're going to say, ew, I don't like that, that looks bad. So then you can just take your paper towel and blot it right out. Throwing on purple and yellow, lots of nice springtime colors. I have this video sped up to about 3 times the speed. I think this painting took me maybe 2-3 hours of cumulative work. I didn't do it all in one go. This is about 6 recording sessions, because I had to stop about every 30 minutes or so to let things dry, so my colors wouldn't bleed into each other and get muddy, as you can kind of see the background doing here. Ew, blue? What? No. That's gross. No, stop it. Oh, good. Way to go, Pass Ashley. Way to go. Yeah, sometimes that happens where it's like you put in a color and it's too dark, and then you just want to like pull it out as quickly as you can, because you can never quite get the white paper back, but you can come close if you grab it fast enough. Yeah, having a paper towel is always really good to lighten up the color. So whenever you're doing watercolors, always do the lightest color you think you'll want first, because you can always go darker. With watercolors, you can always go darker, but it's much harder to go lighter. And now, what I'm doing right here is taking a dry brush and hatching in with some slightly drier paint. I didn't mix in as much water for this paint, to get a nice cross hatch, since the watery background wasn't really working for me. Everything else in the painting is dry at this point. I had to let it dry. I say far too often. Yeah, I wanted some greens, some yellows, make it look a little bit more alive and fun. Put in some at the bottom so it would match. Some blues. Groot is just so adorable. I want him in a pot in my garden. He's so nice. So now I'm gonna get into the shading, and there you go. You see the burnt sienna and the blue. I always put a little bit more blue than burnt sienna because I like bluer shades. So yeah, whenever you mix up the shade, my general rule is to use the same colors that you did for the original base color, and add in some blues, some purples, and whatever color is on the opposite side of the color wheel to sort of desaturate it. And you don't have to do all of that. It's just those are the kind of colors you want to keep in mind as you're doing it, as you're mixing your colors. So on the opposite side of the color wheel, I mean, if you have a red and you want to shade it, it wouldn't hurt to throw in a little bit of green to desaturate it. That doesn't always work. So you just kind of gotta experiment on your palette and see what might work. That really is the key to everything, experimentation. I always, whenever I do watercolors, it's like I always keep in mind at every step that this might be the step that I have to throw it out, which is what made this recording so stressful. This is the first time I'd ever recorded myself doing a watercolor, because fully half of the watercolors that I do, I'm sure I throw out because I ruin them in some way. Which is why I trace so many of them over from my sketchbook instead of doing the first sketch on the watercolor paper, because I want to save it, because I know I might throw it. I know I might end up throwing it out. Oh no, my hair got in the shot. I'm sorry. Oh, it happens again. This is my first time reviewing the footage, so oops. Oh well, I'll have to remember to pin it back next time. Because I'm one of those people that whenever I'm working on close details, my first instinct is to get my nose within 2 inches of whatever I'm working on. Always keep that paper towel nearby. So yeah, whenever you're doing shading, it's like you want lots of contrast, especially for whatever the main focus is. Like the main focus here is Groot, obviously, so he's the one that gets the most contrast, the nicest shading, so that your eye will go to him and his nice woody texture. Watercolor is so great for getting natural textures like wood and whatnot. God, painting nature is the best. Going out in nature is the worst, but painting it is the best. I'm definitely a home bug, haha. Yeah, and so yeah, whenever you here's another tip: whenever you're doing your shading, it's always good to lighten your colors a little bit with water, and save some back. Like whenever I do my pool of colors, you can see I'm mixing my pool of color. I put in a little bit water, but I only put water on about half of it. That way I have a more saturated area to go back to and drop in darker color whenever I need to. And it just saved me so many times, because shading can be a little bit scary. You'd be going, oh, is it going to be too dark? Is it going to be too light? So it's good to have options. It's good to give yourself some options so you don't waste time trying to fix it. Oh, here I'm gonna do the inking process now. I always use a dip pen, because they're just fantastic. I met this guy at a con once. I won't give away his name because he's a professional guy and I don't want to ruin his name. And he is perfectly nice in all other respects. But I was looking at his work and I mentioned his the quality of his lines, that they were really nice, and he says, "Oh yeah, it's because I use a brush, because real comic artists, they only use like real brushes." And I just very politely was just like, "Uh-huh, sure, sure." And because I was using a dip pen at the time, and I do want to say, if anybody says something like that to you, "Oh, real artists use this tool, real artists like use that tool," they're full of shit. Real artists are not defined by their tools. A real artist is defined by their attitudes. So you can be a real artist and use a dip pen or a brush pen, just whatever works best for you. I don't like using brushes for line art very much because they're very difficult to use. They're very difficult to control. I'm all about control. That's what I love so much about dip pens. They give you amazing control. Um, and brushes are just so hard to control. I don't like it. And it's not just that I'm bad at using them, even though I am, but even artists who use brushes on all their works and they've done it for years and they're amazing, I never quite like the look of the lines quite as much. Like Jeff Smith, the creator of Bones. I love his art. He does amazing art, but he uses a brush and it's extremely obvious. And I don't want to say I don't like it, because I do like his art very much, but it's just I don't like it quite as much as someone like Kaoru Mori, the artist who does the manga Emma, and so, yeah, I think, yeah. Well, she does more, but that's the one I'm most familiar with. Emma, her line work is amazing, and it's so obvious that she uses a dip pen, not a brush, cause it just has so much control and it's so good. So the nib that I am using right here, it was my favorite for a long time, but it's been replaced as my favorite. But it's a Hunt number 102. It's a very good nib. It's kind of an all-purpose nib. You can get very thin lines. You can get fairly thick lines. My problem with it, which is the reason why I switched recently to it's called a G nib. I'm not sure. It's some Japanese one, which I bought it because it was cheaper. A zebra G nib is the one I use now for my work. I got it because it was cheaper and I wanted to try, because the Hunt pens are somewhat expensive. Like it'll be like $8. Like not. It's gotta be more than $8. Whatever. It's fairly expensive and they break pretty quickly. Like. I don't want to say break, because I've only ever once had a nib break, but you can tell when a nib goes bad because the two tines won't come together right. So I switched, and so the Hunt 102, I could only use it for about maybe a page and a half worth of inking of comics, and then it would go bad, and I would have to use a new one, and it was too expensive for that, so I tried using a G because it was less expensive, and I am so impressed with them because they are much cheaper. I got a box of like 32 for like $8, and I'm still on the first one. I've been using it for almost 2 months now, inked so many pages with it, and it's still good. And there's the finished project, and you can find me on Facebook at Saxitlerg, Twitter at Saxitlerg1. I have an art blog on Tumblr, and you can find me on DeviantArt. Alright, thanks, bye.